Tessa, and today I am to use this radio to read the books of the Day of the Dead. First is for the ministory. Okay? Now, let's do it with me and answer it.
Okay, here we go. I arrived in Guatemala on the Day of the Dead, November 1st. Did I arrive in Guatemala?
Yes, I arrived in Guatemala.
I arrived in Guatemala. Where did I arrive?
I arrived in Guatemala on the Day
Guatemala,
of the Dead.
right? I arrived in Guatemala. I arrived in Guatemala on the Day of the Dead, November 1st. Who arrived in Guatemala on the Day of the Dead?
I arrived in Guatemala on the Day of the Dead.
Well, me, AJ.
November 1st.
I arrived in Guatemala on the Day of the Dead, November 1st. Did I arrive in Guatemala on November 3rd?
No, I arrived in Guatemala
No, I didn't arrive in Guatemala
third.
on November 3rd.
First.
I arrived
November
in Guatemala on November 1st. What day did I arrive in Guatemala?
I arrived in Guatemala on the Day of the
November
Dead,
1st.
November 1st.
I arrived
yes,
in Guatemala
I arrived in Guatemala on the Day
November
of the Dead,
1st. Where did I arrive on November 1st?
I arrived in Guatemala.
Guatemala. I arrived in Guatemala on
November
November 1st. I arrived in Guatemala on the Day of the Dead, November 1st. I was curious about this holiday, so I went to the cemetery to see what was happening. Was I angry about this holiday?
No.
No, I wasn't
not
angry
I
about
was
this holiday.
happy. I was not
Was
angry.
I sad about this holiday?
No, I was sad about this
No,
holiday.
I wasn't sad about
I
this
was
holiday.
curious.
I was curious about this holiday. Who was curious about this holiday?
I was curious about
I
this
was,
holiday.
AJ. I was curious about this holiday. What was I curious about?
I'm curious about this holiday.
The holiday. Right?
Yes,
I was curious about
this holiday.
the holiday. Which holiday was I curious about?
I'm curious about
Which
the Day
holiday
of
was
the
I
Dead.
curious about?
The Day of the Dead.
The Day of the Dead. I was curious about
the
the Day of the Dead. Was I curious about the Day of the Dead?
Yes.
Or was I curious about Christmas?
I'm curious about the Day of the Dead.
I was curious about the Day of the Dead, of course.
Yes.
I was curious about the Day of the Dead. So I went to the cemetery to see what was happening. Where did I go?
I go to the cemetery. Yes.
I went
to the cemetery.
Did I go to the cemetery or did I go to the airport?
I go to the cemetery and not go to the
I
airport.
went to the cemetery. Who went to the cemetery?
I will go to the cemetery.
AJ.
Yes.
I went to the cemetery. Where did I go?
I
To
go
the
to
cemetery. Right. I
Yes.
went
I
to
went to
the cemetery.
cemetery.
When did I go to the cemetery?
I go on the cemetery.
November 1st.
November 1st, yes.
The Day of the Dead. Right?
On
I went
Guatemala.
to the cemetery
On the day.
on the Day of the Dead. November 1st. Why did I go to the cemetery?
I go to the cemetery to see what's happening.
To see what
yes.
was happening.
To say what's happening.
I went
there.
to the cemetery to see what was happening. Who went to the cemetery to see what was happening?
I will go to the cemetery
Me,
to see
AJ,
what's happening.
Went to the cemetery to see what was happening. Where was the cemetery?
The cemetery in Guatemala. Yes,
the
in
cemetery
Guatemala.
was in Guatemala.
Guatemala.
What is the Day of the Dead?
The Day of the Dead is for
A holiday.
dead people.
The Day
yes.
of the Dead
Yes, it
is a holiday.
holiday.
When is the Day of the Dead?
November 1st.
November 1st. The Day of the Dead was and is November 1st. Okay. So I went to the cemetery
To see
on the Day of the Dead
what's happening.
to see what was happening.
Yes.
What I found was quite interesting. Was it boring?
No, it's not
No,
boring.
it wasn't boring.
It was happy.
Was it interesting?
Yes, it was very interesting.
It was interesting. The cemetery was interesting. How did I feel about the cemetery?
Happy.
I
Curious.
felt it was interesting.
Yes.
Or I thought it was interesting. Was it boring or was it interesting?
It was interesting. It's
It
not
was
boring.
interesting. Of course, it was interesting.
Yes.
What was interesting?
There's
The cemetery.
cemetery.
The cemetery
Yes.
was
Cemetery was interesting.
When was the cemetery interesting?
On the Day
It
of
was
the Dead,
interesting.
November 1st.
On the Day of the Dead,
November 1st.
November 1st. Okay, the atmosphere
Yes.
in the cemetery
Cemetery.
was like a party.
Party.
Was the atmosphere very sad?
Sad. No, it's not sad.
No,
It
the
is
atmosphere was
very
not sad.
happy. It's like a
Atmosphere
party.
was
not
like a party.
sad.
The atmosphere was very happy.
Happy, yes.
Was the atmosphere sad or happy?
It's a very happy.
The atmosphere was happy. The atmosphere
very
was like a party.
Yes.
What was like a party? The atmosphere in the cemetery was like a party.
Yes.
Where was the atmosphere like a party?
There's very
In the cemetery.
Yes.
The cemetery.
In the cemetery.
The atmosphere was like a party in the cemetery. Was the atmosphere like a party at my house?
Yes.
No, not at my house.
Not
the atmosphere was like a party
like a party
in the cemetery.
In the cemetery.
The atmosphere was not like a party
like a party
in my house.
in my house.
So the atmosphere was like a party. There were people everywhere. families were sitting around the graves of their dead ancestors. Where were the families sitting?
They are sitting
around the graves.
Yes, they were sitting around
the graves. Who was sitting around the graves?
Families, yes. Families are sitting around the graves.
The families were sitting around the graves. Were they sitting around the trees?
No, they're not sitting around the trees.
They weren't sitting around the trees.
They're sitting around
They were sitting around the graves. So, where were they sitting?
Around the grave.
Around the graves. Families were sitting around the graves of their dead ancestors. Were they sitting around the graves of their dead ancestors?
Yes.
Yes. They were sitting around the graves of their dead ancestors. Were they sitting around the graves of their friends? No, not really. They were sitting around the graves of their dead ancestors. Who was sitting around the graves?
Families.
Families were sitting around the graves.
Families are sitting around the graves.
Whose graves were they sitting around?
They're sitting around the dead ancestors.
Were they sitting around?
From the dead ancestors.
Yes, their dead ancestors. Their ancestors. Their ancestors' graves. They were sitting around the graves of their dead ancestors. Were they sitting around the graves of their dead ancestors?
Yes.
Or the graves
sitting around
of
the dead
their friends?
They're sitting around of the dead
ancestors, right? They were sitting around the graves
of their dead
ancestors.
Friends.
They cleaned the graves and added fresh flowers. Who cleaned the graves? That's right, the families.
Yes, family
what
cleaned
did
the
they
grave.
add?
They add fresh flower. Yes.
They added
fresh
flowers. Did they add food?
No, they not add food.
No,
they add fresh flower.
Didn't add food. Did they add money?
No, they not add money.
No, they didn't
add fresh flower.
money. They added fresh flowers. What did they clean?
They cleaned the grave.
They cleaned the graves. Whose graves did they clean?
They cleaned the grave of the dead
Their
ancestors.
Right? They cleaned their ancestors' graves. Where did they add flowers?
Because to give it
they added
beautiful.
Flowers to the graves. That's right. They cleaned the graves
and
added fresh flowers. Good. I walked through the cemetery and admired the beauty of all the colorful flowers. Where did I walk?
I was on
Through the cemetery. I walked through the cemetery. I walk through the park? No, I didn't walk through the park. I walked through the cemetery. Where did I walk?
I walked through
the cemetery.
Yes.
Who walked through the cemetery?
I walked through the cemetery.
I did. AJ.
Yes.
I walked through the cemetery. Did I walk through the cemetery
Yes.
Or did I walk through the park?
I walked through the cemetery.
I walked through the cemetery. That's right. And I admired the beauty of all the colorful flowers. Did I admire the beauty of the trees?
No.
No. I didn't admire the beauty of the trees. Did I admire the beauty of the children? No, I didn't admire the beauty of the children. What did I admire?
I admired
The flowers,
flowers.
right? Yeah,
Yes,
I admired
the beauty
of all the colorful flowers.
Yes.
Who admired the beauty of all the colorful flowers?
I
That's right. AJ, me, admired the beauty of all the colorful flowers. Where were the flowers?
On the grave. Yes.
On the graves, right? Or in the cemetery.
Yes.
Right? The flowers were on the graves
in the
cemetery.
cemetery.
Were the flowers in the park?
No,
they weren't in the park. Were the flowers in my house?
No, it's not in my house.
They weren't in my house.
In the cemetery.
Where were the flowers?
It's in the cemetery.
The flowers were on the graves in the cemetery.
Yes.
Where did I walk? I walked through the cemetery. When did I walk through the cemetery?
I walked through the cemetery
November
on the day
1st,
of the dead.
the Day of the Dead.
The Day of the Dead, November 1st.
November 1st, the Day of the Dead.
Yes.
I walked through the cemetery. What was the cemetery like?
It is very
like a party.
Yes,
it was like a party. The cemetery was like a party. Was I curious about this holiday?
Yes, I was very curious about
I
this
was
holiday.
curious about this holiday. Which holiday was I curious about?
I'm curious about the Day of the Dead.
The Day of the Dead. I was curious about the Day of the Dead. So I walked through the cemetery. There was also color in the sky because many kids were flying kites. Where was the color?
In the sky.
In the sky, that's right, in the sky. Why was there color in the sky?
Because many kids are flying kites.
Because kids were flying kites. The kites. There was color in the sky because kids were flying kites. Who were flying kites?
Kids. Were flying kites.
Kids were flying kites. Was the sky colorful or was the sky gray?
Colorful.
The sky was colorful.
Very colorful.
What was colorful? The sky, right?
Yes.
The sky was colorful. Why was the sky colorful? Because kids were flying kites. What were the kids flying?
The kids were flying kites.
Kites, that's right. The kids were flying kites. Where were they flying kites?
In the cemetery.
In the cemetery. The kids were flying kites in the cemetery. Who was flying kites in the cemetery?
The kids. The kids were flying kites in the cemetery.
Children. Kids were flying kites in the cemetery. Some families were having a picnic next to the graves. We, in the United States, don't do this.
Don't do this.
So some families were having a picnic next to the graves. They ate, they drank, and they chatted together. Did they eat? Yes, they ate.
They ate.
Who ate?
Families, yes.
Families, right, of course.
Are
Families ate.
rich.
What did they eat?
They ate
Guatemalan food.
food.
Right? Food from Guatemala.
From Guatemala on
The
day
families
of the
ate
dead.
Guatemalan food. Did they eat American food?
No, they not eat American
they
food.
didn't eat American food. They ate
Guatemalan
food. Where did they eat Guatemalan food?
In the cemetery.
In the cemetery, right? They ate food in the cemetery. They ate Guatemalan food in the cemetery. They also drank in the cemetery. Did they drink water in the cemetery?
No, they not drink water.
No. What did they drink
Beer.
in the cemetery?
They drank beer.
They drank beer.
Yes.
Who drank beer?
Families.
The families.
Yes,
the families
drank beer.
What did they eat?
They ate
Guatemalan food. They ate Guatemalan food and drank beer. Did they drink beer or did they drink water?
They drank beer.
They drank
They not
beer.
drank water.
Where did they drink beer?
They drank beer in the cemetery.
They drank beer in the cemetery. When did they drink beer? November 1st. The day of the dead. They drank beer. When did they eat?
They ate
on November 1st. The day of the dead. Did they chat together?
Yes, they chatted together.
They chatted together. Who chatted together?
Families. Yes,
The
families
of course.
chat
The
together.
families chatted together. When did they chat together? Yes, November 1st, day of the dead. People laughed and smiled. In the United States, cemeteries are always somber. Are cemeteries happy in the United States?
No, it's not happy.
No, never.
In the States,
Cemeteries
are
aren't
somber.
happy in the United States. Cemeteries are always somber, sad and serious. Are cemeteries serious in the United States?
Yes.
Yes, they are. In the United States, cemeteries are always somber. They are always serious.
And this is for today. See you later. Bye-bye.